The hospital smelled like cleaning liquid and cold air. The kind of cold that goes right through your coat. It was a Tuesday, February. Gray sky outside. The kind of day that gives you no warning about what's coming. I got the call at 2:17 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was sitting at my desk between two patient appointments, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My phone lit up. Mark's name on the screen. He told me his mother, Linda, had been taken to Riverside General. Chest pains. Possibly her heart. He spoke fast like he was distracted by something. He told me not to worry. He said he was already there. I didn't even finish the coffee. I grabbed my coat. I told my receptionist to move my 3 o'clock appointment. And I got in my car and drove 22 minutes across town. Because that's what you do, right? That's what a good daughter-in-law does. You don't think. You don't wait. You just go. And that's exactly what I had been doing for 4 years. Showing up. Quietly. Without being asked twice. Without anyone ever really noticing. Parked on level 3. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor, the cardiac wing. I turned left when I got out, the same way I had done once before 2 winters ago, the last time Linda had a health scare. I walked down the hallway. And then I turned the corner. And in about 4 seconds, just 4 seconds, my whole life changed. Mark was standing at the far end of the corridor, near the big window. But he wasn't pacing. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't sitting with the tired, worried look of a man whose mother was lying in a hospital bed 30 feet away. He was leaning against the wall. Relaxed. Close to someone. Whispering. And whoever this woman was, she was laughing. Softly. Her hand resting near his arm on the windowsill. Comfortable. Like she had been there before. Like this was normal. My feet stopped moving on their own. I couldn't see her face yet. Just her side profile. Dark hair. A gray sweater. And then. The earrings. Small gold hoops. Tiny turquoise bead in the center. I knew those earrings. I had bought those earrings. I had wrapped them in white tissue paper inside a small box from the boutique on Clement Street and handed them to her at her birthday dinner 2 years ago while everyone at the table sang and she laughed and hugged me and said I always knew exactly what she would love. She turned slightly. And I saw her face. Jessica. My best friend. In years. The person I called when I was scared. The person who sat beside me at my grandmother's funeral. The person whose number I knew by heart because I had never once thought I would need to delete it. She was standing in a hospital hallway with my husband. Laughing. I did not make a sound. I did not move. I don't think I was even breathing. I just stood completely still while something deep inside me, something I hadn't even realized I had been protecting all this time, quietly broke into pieces. And then Linda looked up. She was sitting in a chair just outside the room. Hospital gown. Arms crossed. And she looked directly at me from across that hallway. She didn't gasp. She didn't stand up. She didn't call out to Mark. She didn't do any of the things a woman does when she's surprised. She just looked at me. Steady. Like she had been waiting for this moment. Like she had always known it was coming. Like she had known for a long time. And that look, that one silent look, told me everything. She knew. She had always known. I turned around. I walked back to the elevator. I pressed the button for level 3. I sat down in my car, both hands on the steering wheel, and I stared straight ahead at the concrete wall of the parking structure. My hands were shaking. My eyes were burning. But I did not cry. Picked up my phone. Called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't say much. I didn't know how to put it into words yet. I just said his name. And he said, calm, steady, no panic, just my father, he said. I'm coming. Don't move. I put the phone down on the passenger seat. And I waited. Because whatever was going to happen next, whatever came after this moment, I already knew one thing. I was not going to fall apart. Not here. Not for them. My name is Elena. I'm 34 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist and 4 years ago, I opened my own small practice, Clarity OT, in a leased suite on the 2nd floor of a medical building on the west side of town. 6 treatment rooms. A small reception area with a blue couch I picked out myself. For therapists on staff, including me. We specialized in post-surgical rehabilitation and pediatric sensory processing. I built it from an $18,000 personal loan and 2 years of working evenings to keep my overhead down. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this because it matters later. Before I met Mark, I had been offered a partnership position at a larger rehabilitation group in Portland. More money, more resources, a career trajectory that probably would have looked very different by now. I turned it down because Mark and I had just gotten serious, and his whole life was here. His job, his mother, his roots. Chose to stay. Chose him. I was the kind of wife who remembered his colleagues' spouses' names. Who sent Linda flowers on her birthday and called her every Sunday. Who co-signed a $38,000 SBA business loan for Mark's Logistics Consulting LLC in 2022 because he said the bank needed a stronger credit profile on the application and I had the better score. I was the kind of friend who flew to Jessica's mother's funeral in Phoenix on 48 hours' notice, sat beside her in the front pew, and held her hand through the whole service. I was not naive. I was not a doormat. I was someone who believed, genuinely and completely, that the people she loved would love her back the same way. That belief cost me 4 years. What came after it gave me everything else. Here is the thing about being slowly erased by people who smile at you. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the spaces between things. In the moments you almost say something and then decide not to. In the explanations you give yourself for why it probably didn't mean what it felt like it meant. Started with small things. Or what I told myself were small things. The first Thanksgiving after Mark and I got married, Linda hosted dinner at her house on Delwood Avenue. 12 people around the table. She had written place cards in her careful cursive handwriting, everyone's name on a little folded card tucked beside the good china. I remember walking around the table looking for mine and finding it set up near the kitchen pass-through, slightly apart from the main table where an extra fold-out section had been added. Mark's cousin and his girlfriend were near me. Linda explained it was because of the flow of the space. Mark said nothing. Jessica was at the main table, 3rd seat from the head. She'd been invited because she was practically family, Linda said, squeezing her hand. I set down my coat and helped carry dishes from the kitchen all evening. Jessica sat and laughed with Mark's aunts. I didn't make a scene. Filed it away. The second thing was the group chat. Sometime in early 2023, I noticed that Mark would laugh at his phone at dinner, and when I asked what was funny, he'd say, "Just the family group chat," and turn the screen slightly away. Casually. Not dramatically. Just enough. One afternoon I saw a notification flash across his phone screen when he left it on the counter. A message from Linda in something called, "The Fam House with Garden," with a laughing emoji. I was not in that chat. I had been married into this family for over 2 years. I was not in the family group chat. And when I mentioned it to Mark gently that evening, he said he'd ask his mom to add me. He never did. And I never brought it up again, which I think said something about the shape our marriage had quietly taken. The third thing, and this one I should have acted on immediately, was the loan. In March of 2022, Mark came to me with the paperwork for his LLC. He'd been doing freelance logistics consulting for about 18 months and wanted to formalize the business, take on a larger contract, and needed operating capital. The SBA loan was $38,000. His credit score at the time was 619. Mine was 791. The bank needed me as a co-borrower. Sign. What I didn't fully register at the time because I trusted him, because I skimmed instead of read, because I was in the middle of a credentialing audit at my own practice, was that the LLC operating agreement I also signed that day listed me as a 40% equity member. Mark had needed my credit score. His attorney had needed a second member on the LLC to satisfy the loan terms. So they'd given me 40% of a business I had never been consulted about, never asked to help run, and never told I actually owned a piece of. That document sat in a manila folder in our home filing cabinet for 2 years. I had forgotten it existed. My father had not. My dad arrived at the hospital parking structure at 4:43 p.m. I know because I watched the timestamp on my phone refresh while I sat in my car, not crying, not calling anyone, just sitting in that particular kind of stillness that comes when your body hasn't caught up to what your mind already knows. He pulled into the space beside me in his gray Camry, the one with the dent on the rear bumper he's never bothered to fix. He got out slowly. He's 67, his knees aren't what they were, and he came around to my window and just looked at me. One long look. The kind only a father who has known you your whole life can give. The kind that doesn't need a question attached to it. I told him what I'd seen. All of it. The hallway. The window. The earrings. Linda's face. He was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened his jacket, the navy one he wears when he's being serious, and said, "Take me inside." We rode the elevator to the 4th floor together. I didn't know what I was expecting. Some part of me, the part that had been explaining things away for 4 years, was still quietly hoping there was a version of this that made sense. That I had misread something. That the earrings were a coincidence. That Linda's expression had been surprise, not recognition. That part of me died in the hallway. Mark saw us coming from 20 feet away. I watched his face move through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, and then a performance of concern so practiced it made me feel slightly sick. He opened his arms slightly, the way you do when you're about to offer a hug, and said, "Elena, hey. I was just about to call you. Mom's doing better. They think it was just." Jessica turned around. She looked at me and went completely still. And in that stillness I saw everything I needed to see. No shock. No confusion. Just a held breath and a very careful face. "Hi," she said, quietly, like a person who had rehearsed neutral. I didn't say anything to her. I looked at Mark. "How long?" he asked. "Elena, this isn't." "How long, Mark?" He looked at the floor, which was its own answer. And then Linda appeared in the doorway of her room. She had clearly been listening. She was in a hospital gown and 4-line in her left arm, and she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as tired annoyance, the look of someone who has been waiting for an inconvenience to resolve itself and is frustrated it hasn't yet. She said, and I want you to understand that she said this clearly, in a normal volume, in a hospital hallway with 2 nurses at the station 15 feet away, she said, "Elena, I think you already know this wasn't ever the right fit. You've always known. You're a smart girl. Don't make this ugly." She said you're a smart girl the way you'd say it to someone you had never once taken seriously. My father, who had been standing slightly behind me and had not said a single word, stepped forward then. He looked at Linda. Then he looked at Mark. His voice was completely even when he spoke. "My daughter's name is on your deed. And on your loan. And I am a real estate attorney. So before anyone in this hallway says another word, I'd strongly suggest everyone get a lawyer." He turned to me. Held out his hand. "Come on, sweetheart. We're done here." I took his hand. We walked back to the elevator. The doors closed. That was the last time I stood in a room with all 3 of them at once. We didn't go home that night. My dad drove me to my parents' house. The house I grew up in, the one with a yellow kitchen and the squeaky 3rd step. And my mother made tea without being asked and set a plate of food in front of me that I didn't eat but was grateful for anyway. My father went to the small room off the hallway that he uses as a home office. He came back 40 minutes later with a legal pad, a pen, and a question. "Elena," he said, sitting across the kitchen table from me, "is your name still on the deed to the house on Morrow Street?" Said yes. We had purchased the house in 2021 using $47,000 from the inheritance my maternal grandmother had left me, plus a joint mortgage. My name was the primary borrower. Mark's name was secondary. We had never refinanced. Nothing had changed on the title. My father wrote something on the legal pad. "And the business loan, the $38,000, you're still listed as co-borrower on that?" He nodded slowly. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy, slightly creased like it had been folded and stored, of the LLC operating agreement from March 2022. The one I had signed during the credentialing audit. The one I had not read carefully enough. He pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of page 3. Section 7.2. Member Equity and Voting Rights. Elena Vasquez. My full legal name. listed as a 40% equity member of Hartwell Logistics LLC. I stared at it. Mark needed your credit score, my father said, not unkindly. But his attorney needed a second member on the operating agreement to satisfy the SBA loan terms. They gave you 40% of the company on paper. I don't think either of them thought you'd ever look at it twice. I had not looked at it twice. I had not looked at it once after I signed it. But my father had. He had read every document connected to our finances with the quiet, thorough attention of a man who had spent 31 years practicing real estate and contract law. He had said nothing to me at the time because it had looked, on paper, like a reasonable arrangement between a married couple. No longer looked like that. What we had, sitting on that kitchen table at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday in February, was the following. My name as primary borrower on a $340,000 mortgage for the house on Morrow Street. My name as co-borrower on a $38,000 SBA business loan, of which approximately $31,000 remained outstanding. An assigned operating agreement giving me 40% equity in a consulting LLC that, my father had already looked this up while I was sitting in the kitchen, had filed $214,000 in gross revenue the previous fiscal year. Mark had been doing well. Better than he'd told me. My father set down his pen. They thought you'd fall apart, he said. They thought you'd cry and leave and let him handle the paperwork. He looked at me steadily. Do you want to fall apart? Or do you want to handle the paperwork? I picked up the legal pad. Pulled it toward me. Tell me what to do, I said. And that was the moment everything shifted. What they didn't know was that I went home that night, slept 4 hours, and woke up at 6 a.m. with something that felt less like grief and more like clarity. I made coffee. I opened the filing cabinet in the second bedroom, the one Mark used as a home office, and I began to photograph every document inside it. Methodically, folder by folder. The mortgage statements, the LLC filings, the SBA loan agreement, the past 3 years of joint tax returns, the insurance policies, the vehicle titles, the investment account statements, which showed a brokerage account I hadn't known existed, opened in Mark's name alone in November 2022, currently holding approximately $41,000. I was at it for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I texted my first patient of the day to reschedule. Kept photographing. By 9 a.m. I had everything backed up to a secure cloud folder my father had set up for me the night before. I locked the filing cabinet. I put the key in my purse. And then I sat down at the kitchen table in the house that I had paid $47,000 toward in cash, in the house whose mortgage I was the primary borrower on, and I drank my coffee quietly. Mark had not come home. He was, I assumed, still somewhere with Jessica. I did not call him. I did not text him. I did not give him any information about my state of mind, my location, or my plans. This was my father's first instruction, and it was the most important one. Do not communicate anything until the legal position is established. My father's colleague, a family law attorney named Patricia, who had been practicing for 26 years and who I had met once at a firm holiday party and remembered as someone who listened very carefully and smiled very little, agreed to meet us that afternoon. We sat in her office for 5 hours and 40 minutes. I am not exaggerating. She reviewed every document I had photographed. She made calls. She cross-referenced the LLC filing with the county business registry. She pulled the mortgage record. At one point she asked her paralegal to run a property title search while we waited. By 7 p.m. we had a legal separation filing prepared and ready to submit. We had a motion to freeze joint marital assets pending divorce proceedings. We had a formal demand letter drafted to Hartwell Logistics LLC, notifying them that a 40% equity member was invoking her rights under Section 7.2 of the operating agreement and requesting a full accounting of business revenues, expenses, and distributions for the preceding 24 months. And Patricia had identified something else. The $38,000 SBA loan had a cross-default clause. If the marriage dissolved and the co-borrower, me, formally requested separation of financial liability, the lender had the contractual right to call the remaining balance due in full within 90 days. Mark could refinance in his name alone, or he could pay the $31,000 outstanding balance outright. His options were narrowing. On Wednesday morning, the legal separation was filed. The joint accounts were frozen pending a court order. A notice of lien was placed on the Morrow Street property, meaning Mark could not sell, refinance, or transfer the house without my written consent and legal resolution of my ownership stake. I moved the contents of my personal checking and savings accounts, which were in my name only, always had been, to a new account at a different bank. Then I sat down and sent Mark one text message. The first communication I had initiated since the hospital. It said, "We need to meet. Thursday, 11 a.m. Bring your attorney. E." He called me 4 times in the next 2 hours. I did not answer. I went to work. I saw 6 patients. I reviewed my quarterly billing reports. I had lunch at my desk. A sandwich, sparkling water, a clementine. I was, from the outside, a woman having a normal Thursday. What I was, on the inside, was someone who had stopped performing loyalty and started practicing precision. Jessica, I should mention, had been an employee of Clarity OT for 14 months. She worked 2 days a week as a front desk coordinator, a position I had created for her when she'd lost her previous job and needed income. I had given her that job without a formal interview because she was my best friend and I had trusted her completely. On Wednesday afternoon, I sent her a formal written notice of employment termination, citing a conflict of interest with the practice owner, effective immediately. It was processed through our HR platform. Her final paycheck was calculated and scheduled. Her access credentials were revoked at 5 p.m. She sent me 11 text messages between Wednesday evening and Thursday morning. I read all of them. I responded to none. Thursday was coming, and I was ready. Thursday morning I woke up at 5:47 a.m. without an alarm. I showered, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window for a long time watching the street outside. The maple tree in the front yard, the one I had specifically asked about when we were viewing the house, the one the realtor had said was at least 40 years old, was bare in the February cold. Just branches, completely exposed, and somehow still standing. I put on the charcoal blazer I wear when I'm presenting at continuing education seminars. The one that makes me feel like I know exactly what I'm doing because I do. I drove to Patricia's office, parked in the underground structure, and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor. My father was already there. He was wearing the navy jacket. Patricia had arranged the conference room simply. A rectangular table, 6 chairs, carafe of water, a stack of documents on her side, organized and tabbed. Nothing theatrical. Nothing designed to intimidate through decoration. Just facts, arranged in order, waiting to be read. Mark arrived at 11:09 a.m. 9 minutes late, which told me something about how seriously he was taking this, or how badly he'd slept. He had brought an attorney, a younger man I didn't recognize, in a gray suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders. They sat down across from us. Mark looked at me and then looked away. He had the expression of someone who had prepared several speeches and wasn't sure which one to use. He didn't use any of them. Patricia spoke for the first 11 minutes without interruption. She laid out the legal position clearly, without drama, the way someone does when the facts are doing all the necessary work on their own. Primary borrower on the mortgage. Co-borrower on the SBA loan. 40% equity member of Hartwell Logistics, LLC. Joint marital assets frozen pending proceedings. Lien placed on the Morrow Street property. Cross-default clause on the business loan, triggering a 90-day repayment window upon formal separation of financial liability. Mark's attorney leaned over and said something quietly to him. Mark's jaw tightened. Then Patricia slid a document across the table. A formal accounting request for Hartwell Logistics, requesting full revenue and distribution records for 24 months. And beside it, a printout, pulled from public business filings, showing that Hartwell Logistics LLC had invoiced $214,000 in gross revenue the previous fiscal year. Mark looked at that printout for a long time. She's not actually involved in the business, his attorney said. The equity listing was a formality for the loan. Section 7.2 of the operating agreement, Patricia said pleasantly, does not use the word formality. It uses the word member. And members have rights. Silence. The negotiation that followed lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. I will not take you through every exchange because some of it was technical and some of it was painful in ways I'm still sorting through. But here is what Thursday produced in concrete terms, because I think you deserve the concrete terms. The house on Morrow Street would be listed for sale within 60 days. After the outstanding mortgage balance was settled, the net proceeds would be split, 70% to me, reflecting my initial $47,000 cash contribution and my status as primary borrower, 30% to Mark. Based on current market valuations in that neighborhood, my share was estimated at between $89,000 and $104,000. The $31,000 remaining on the SBA business loan would be refinanced entirely into Mark's name within 45 days, releasing me from all co-borrower liability. If he could not secure refinancing, the cross-default clause would be triggered and the full balance would be called due. Mark's attorney pushed back on the LLC equity. They argued the 40% membership had been a structural formality with no corresponding capital contribution from me. Patricia pointed out calmly that the operating agreement contained no such language, that I had been listed as a member in good standing for 24 months, and that we were prepared to pursue a full accounting of all revenue and distributions during that period in court, which would be a public proceeding. Mark looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the ceiling briefly. They settled. Mark would buy out my 40% membership interest in Hartwell Logistics LLC for $31,500. A figure calculated conservatively against the reported revenue, payable within 90 days. In exchange, I would sign a release of my membership interest and cooperate with the refinancing of the business loan. My father sat beside me through all 3 hours and 20 minutes and said almost nothing. He didn't need to. He had done his part 2 nights ago at a kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of tea. What was happening in this conference room was the result of that night. Of him asking the right question. Of me deciding to answer it. When the session ended and the preliminary terms were signed for drafting, Mark stood up and looked at me across the table. I don't know what he was expecting. Some version of the woman who had stood frozen in that hospital hallway, maybe. Someone undone. He said, "Elena, I picked up my folder and looked at him clearly. "Have your attorney send everything to Patricia," I said. "She handles all of it from here." I walked out of the conference room. My father held the elevator door for me. We rode down to the parking structure in silence. When we got to our cars, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder. That was all. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, things resolved with the quiet efficiency of properly filed paperwork. The house on Morrow Street was listed on March 4th. It sold in 11 days. A young couple, their first home, they asked if they could keep the maple tree in the front yard. The closing was on April 17th. My share of the proceeds was $96,400. It cleared into my personal account on a Wednesday afternoon while I was between patients, and I looked at the notification on my phone for a moment and then went back to work. Mark completed the business loan refinancing in his name alone on day 41. The cross-default clause was never triggered, but it had been useful. Leverage doesn't always need to be used to do its work. Sometimes the presence of it is sufficient. The LLC buyout check, $31,500, arrived by certified mail on day 78. I deposited it and used a portion of it to repaint the reception area of Clarity OT. We went with a soft sage green. My patient said it was calming. Thought so too. Jessica sent me a long email in March. I read it once. I did not respond. There are people who deserve your silence not as punishment, but simply because your words are worth more than the space they'd occupy. She was one of them. Linda, as my father had predicted, was simply left out. She had no legal standing in any of it. She had co-signed nothing, owned nothing connected to our marriage, and had no claim on any proceeding. She had spent years positioning herself at the center of her son's life and his family. In the end, she was a woman sitting in a hospital chair with an 4 in her arm, watching the daughter-in-law she had never valued walk out of a hallway she would never come back to. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness. More with a kind of clarity about how much energy I had spent trying to be accepted by someone who had made her decision about me before I ever had a chance. I am 34 years old. I own a small occupational therapy practice with 6 treatment rooms and a sage green reception area. I have $96,400 from the sale of a house I should have been more careful about sharing. I have $31,500 from an LLC stake I didn't know I had. I have my name on nothing that doesn't belong to me, and my signature on nothing I haven't read completely. I have my father, who drove 40 minutes on a gray February afternoon because I called him with a shaking voice, and who walked into a hospital corridor in his navy jacket and said the exact right thing to the exact right people. I have my mother's yellow kitchen, where I sat at a table with a legal pad and decided to stop performing loyalty and start protecting myself. And I have something I didn't know I'd been missing for 4 years, the specific quiet of a life that belongs entirely to you. No group chat you're excluded from. No seat near the kitchen pass-through. No co-signatures on other people's ambitions. Just your own name on your own accounts in your own space. If you've ever been the one who kept showing up for people who were keeping score against you, I want you to know that the exit from that situation is almost never loud. It's almost never dramatic. It's a phone call to someone who loves you. It's a question about a document you almost forgot you signed. It's a decision made quietly at a kitchen table, to stop accepting what you were given and start claiming what was already yours. That's not revenge. That's just knowing your worth and finally acting like it. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the invisible one in a room full of people who were supposed to love you, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me the moment you decided to stop shrinking. I read every comment. And if you know someone who is still in the middle of their story, still in the hallway, still frozen, still trying to explain away what they already know, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing someone needs to hear is that the other side of that hallway exists. And it's quieter there. And it's theirs. Hit subscribe if you're new here. New stories every week. I'll see you in the next one.